The XPRIZE Healthspan is a $101 million global competition aimed at revolutionizing human aging and health, and it has made phenomenal progress since its launch in 2023. Now, the winning team of the XPRIZE Healthspan must demonstrate that their solution restores muscle, cognitive, and immune function by a minimum of 10 years, with a goal of 20 years in people aged 50 to 80 years, and any treatment must take less than 1 year. Now, time for submission is closing in, so who better to check in for a progress report than Jamie Justice, the Executive Vice President of Health Domain at XPRIZE Foundation, and she's joining us here today. So, Jamie, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Phil. It's really great to check in.
Oh, well, I mean, obviously, you guys were very big news in the industry, and now we're kind of getting close to the first wave of submissions and deadlines and so on. So it'd be great to know how you're doing on numbers, in terms of pre-registrations and, what's the types of companies that you're dealing with.
Oh, great questions. So we are now 1 year since we had our first public announcement that this prize was coming. So this has been a year of pre-registrations, of public comment, talking to teams, building advisory boards, and we officially opened for registration in July. Our registration for primary registration closes on the 20th. We allow people to submit their technical submissions through the 31st of December. So we have a really good sense of what teams are coming in, what they look like, and what some of their solutions are. And right now, we now have, as of today, 554 teams have
Wow.
registered to compete from around the world. And they really are global. So we have 55 countries that are
Wow, that's
represented out of
incredible.
that 500. And again, this is a really wide recruitment funnel that we start with. We gather interest, we get inputs. There's a lot that goes into that just really large number. But those who are actually submitting technical submissions, again, not everyone who registers realizes that they want to continue and compete and put together a submission yet. So those who are submitting for first round judging, so again, this first round, this is for the milestone one. We're going to name 40 semifinalists. As of today, we have 165 qualifying submissions started. And we expect to, we've already beat our goal. Our goal is to get at least 100 to 150 of really high quality technical submissions. And we beat that. And I think we're on track for probably 200 submissions, which will be good.
Oh,
So
well, that's
we'll have to go again from 500 to 200 to 40 semifinalists that will be announced and
gosh.
awarded.
Yeah, I mean that's a big task for your team, of course, and a big task
Certainly.
for the judging panel. I mean, there's a. I mean, I've been around with conferences all through the year, and people have been talking about their submissions, and they've been every type of company you can imagine. So, is there any particular trend in what you're seeing? I mean, are we seeing a lot of deep biotech, or are you seeing supplement submissions, apps, and so forth? What are you getting?
We have everything. And I think for me, this has been one of the most thrilling parts is actually watching the global community come in and love seeing the breadth and depth as well, and the types of submissions and where they're coming in. Just in terms of composition of teams, we're at about 50% of our teams are existing companies, biotech companies of some kind. And we have about 20% of our current qualifying submissions are from academic teams. And then we have many that are sort of hybrids in between. Maybe they're for profit, but they have a nonprofit arm, or they're industry academic partnerships. And so, in those fractions, they fit really well with other X prizes that have been run. And then the other percentage I've noticed that we're looking at 70% of makeup of existing companies or academics. The sort of the in-between partnerships are probably maybe another 10%. We have other, not-for-profit research organizations or private research organizations. We have individuals. Some people are
Yep.
coming in with an idea or maybe a biohacking group that their team composition is a little bit different. And we do have a couple of publicly traded companies. But I
Oh,
would
that's
say
very.
it is. But the majority of our companies that are coming in, the majority of those biotechs are sort of still in that early stage startup. For them, this is a big risk, but the reward is quite strong if they do proceed through the competition.
Yeah, and of course that's a particular challenge for the makeup of your judging panel, because you've
Yes.
got a lot of assessment of very early stage clinical all the way through to the other things that you've mentioned. Obviously, the bar is high, right? I mean,
Yes.
I remember when I heard the X Prize definition of what success looks like, I was thinking, oh my goodness, that was that's big. And I spoke with Steve Alstad, and he said, well, we thought very deeply about it, and we think it's achievable. I was going to ask you, do you have any from the realms of biotech, that's understood. But do you have anybody that's kind of working on the basics of lifestyle intervention and the sort of diet, sleep, exercise, nutrition aspects of the prize?
We have a lot of teams that are either working on that in isolation, but the majority are thinking of some kind of a lifestyle in combination with either a drug, a gene therapy, an RNA-based therapy, maybe stem cells or other biologics, and that they would be coupling this with either recommended activity levels at the least. Some are actually looking at diets, either fasting mimicking diets or some kind of food clocking paradigm. And that's really common. Others are coming in with a lifestyle approach that is circadian rhythm based, is that we have some really interesting ones there. And again, it's just a question of whether they're going to put those lifestyle interventions in on their own, or if they're looking to partner or couple with a company that might be working on something more novel. And I
Hmm.
think the real catch there is going to be figuring out not just combinatorial approaches, which are very important, I think, for aging, but also how you can begin to personalize. Right. And so, how do you figure out which lifestyle or which combination of lifestyle to partner with which agent? For me, watching the field try to figure that out actively within the prize,
Hmm.
because again, we're just pushing teams to do, we are
Yeah.
not drawing restrictions on what they should do. And so really letting them innovate and advance the field, which is quite exciting. There are also teams that are using, and it's somewhere between a device and a lifestyle intervention, that are also really strong and very interesting, of again, really honing in on that personalization. And so using a lot of biomonitoring. So whether those are through app-based digital monitoring, other imaging-based, whatever they might use, or even coupling blood-based biomarkers, and how they're going to use like really advanced monitoring to inform decisions and personalized approaches. And so
Yeah.
again, that's kind of not quite lifestyle. It's not quite anything else, but they're really are leaning in. So it's a very exciting time to be in the field.
Yeah, I'm sure. I can imagine it's very exciting to see what comes
It
into your
is.
inbox, right, with these submissions. Now, I mean, I know Peter Diamandis is a big fan of
Yes.
data, and this, as you say, this personalization is going to be a really key part of this. But just sort of revisiting the winning teams sort of
Yes.
milestone, they've got to hit a minimum of 10 years improvement within 1 year on restoring muscle, cognitive function, and immune function, right?
You
So,
have nailed it.
and those are all different disciplines in themselves, right?
Yes.
So, are you finding it that people are working on basic pathways that are driving all of these, or are you finding that people are sort of looking at different modules that they're trying to glue together, or is it? I'm sure it's a combination of all of those. But is there a trend in what you're seeing?
I don't know that I have the evidence to show that there's a strong trend on either side. I think it
Hmm.
actually depends on where the teams are coming in from. And so we do have a number of companies that they might already be testing or working on agents within a specific pipeline. For example, if you have a company or team that's really deep in the Alzheimer's and dementia space, is they might have something that's very much neural acting and is really targeting sort of cognitive function. And so they might just actually be running a trial that they're powering around cognition and Alzheimer's endpoints for prevention, and that they'll add muscle and immune and just see if this also works. Maybe they have some early evidence. And those teams might be willing to talk to other groups who are, again, doing those more sort of specific other areas. Maybe they'll use what they're already using, and that they'll meet with one of these lifestyle teams that seems like they have maybe a behavioral intervention that's really great for building, maintaining muscle and VO2 max. And so that's an approach that we certainly see. And then we also see, I would say, almost an equal part. We see the converse of that is have people really looking upstream at the biology of aging and not going to any one system, which I would say is very much in the spirit of the prize. And we actually went back and forth about whether or not to require that approach or not. and realize that it misses the spirit of the competition, is that we're
Hmm.
asking people for solutions. However
Yeah.
they get there is their business. And
Right.
so we're seeing both approaches. Perhaps the former is more well represented, of having people knowing that they might have a drug, an agent, a therapeutic that maybe targets two of the systems. Maybe they're going to get cognition and they're going to get brain. They have no idea if they'll get something with immune. And so they might, again, start working or thinking about other ways to build out that third for that triangle that we're asking people to
Right.
achieve.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously there's some kind of burning questions that are in my mind, right?
Of
Because
course.
I'm always like fast forward to where we're going next, and of course you've got this transition coming up of the proof of concept clinical studies, to 1 year clinical outcomes, which again is a very accelerated timeline. Love the pace. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously some biotechs are going to struggle perhaps with the timescales with that. So I'd be interested to understand how you see the ability to transition in the future. And I guess the second question, which is like on everybody's mind with all of this space of longevity at the moment, is how are you going to calibrate and understand whether you've actually moved the needle or not?
Right.
Is there a standardized system that everybody's going to be benchmarking to, or will they be marking their own scorecard?
Oh, great. Two excellent questions. I'm going to start with the last one where we're talking about, benchmarking. And when our teams get to finals, and again, the finals are going to start in 2026, I'll come back to timeline in a moment, is that we are going to be delivering a clinical protocol to these teams, and we're going to have a centralized data management system. So that
Oh, right.
prospectively, as they're running trials, they have to enter the data into the system using a very standardized format so that we can actually make comparisons across teams. And so we're really running that finals as a hybrid between a centralized and decentralized trial. We'll have a centralized data structure, but the teams are really responsible for doing and running their own trials, meaning they have a lot of license to identify the population that they want to recruit or the patients, as long as they're sort of maintained. They just have to justify what they're doing and how. We give them the freedom to administer their therapeutic as needed in whatever approach they would like. Again, it could be a one and done, right? Is that if you're looking at a gene therapy or something that just requires a single and that you're going to just measure them again in a year later and see what happens. Or others are going to be more doing this sort of daily maintenance approach. And again, we leave the teams to do what they need to do. But we ask that as they continue on, they have to use a single data management system to input data using the protocols that we'll work with them on, and that there will be a central place for that data, not just for the endpoints for muscle, cognitive, and immune function, but also to evaluate safety. It's just to make sure that nothing's going drastically off course. But the teams are ultimately responsible to have their own safety and regulatory boards. We just provide an
Right.
additional level of oversight that our judges might ask for.
Okay, so is the standardization going down to, for example, whether it's an app or it's a biologic, you've got to be in a position where you're providing liquid samples, blood-based samples, or are you doing, a standardized cognition test or a timed up and go test for muscle? How are you benchmarking against all of these really complex
Wonderful.
benchmarks?
So this is where our team has been incredibly busy over the last year. Is we have about 22 scientific advisors and technical consultants who have been providing advice and direction for the endpoint assessments that will be used, and we have sub-working groups around each of those three categories of muscle, cognition, and
Okay,
immune. And
right.
yes, each one will have a functional component that we're actually measuring. So if you perturb the system and you have to act or respond, these are performance-based metrics, to use a US FDA terminology. So the
Right.
performance-based measures for muscle, right, we're looking at ideally would be VO2 max. But if a team or a clinic doesn't have access to the training or the equipment to do that, then we'll have all teams drop to a secondary measure, which would be maybe a 6-minute walk or a corridor walk.
Okay.
As well for that muscle, we're also looking at leg power. So again, with some kind of a machine where you can measure the power output of the muscle, it's a little more sensitive than strength. And then we're trying to add in below that is one standardized measure that's not performance-based under each area. Ideally, this would be a biospecimen-based biomarker. Some of these we're leaving a little bit open until we have some more validation work to go to ensure if that's the right measure for a global study. In the cognition side, we're looking at a computerized test battery. Again, we've made suggestions, but we're going to have flexibility when we get to our finalists to have them give us input. Is that there may be language dependence, that if we identify a system too early, it might not be adequate. And of course, that's a field that is rapidly progressing. And so if there is a better or more sensitive system, we're open to vetting those before we go to finals. And again, once we get to finals, our teams are as much a part of the design process as our advisors. And so there's some of this that we're putting out as guidelines. But until we know who our finalists are, we can't set them in stone as rules and regs until we have a chance to feed back and make sure that it's something that actually works for the scientific community, not just our advisors of what we would love to see. And for immune function, that one we're leaving quite open right now. We have a new
Okay.
work group that's opening in 2025. What our advisors found is that the criteria that we use to determine the endpoints, we're looking at things that have to have one face validity. So they have to represent the system, and they have to be important to aging, meaning that you'll observe changes across chronologic age. They have to be predictive of risk of age-related conditions and outcomes that are important for larger clinical studies. So these are diseases, disability, or mortality risk. Two, they also have to be able to, we have to build reference thresholds. So we have to know what they look like longitudinally. And that's a really difficult measure to have. And then the third, the final categories, they have to be responsive to an intervention. So they can't just be birthday candles, because birthday candles would certainly fit all of the previous criteria, but they don't change with intervention. And so we have these really strict criteria that our advisors have been using. And when it came to immune function, is that our advisors felt that we did not have a validated measure that met all of our criteria. And so what we're doing now on the scientific side is using the PRIZE and those PRIZE metrics to help us inform the science and develop the data set necessary to build those endpoints. So we've made suggested measures, and we're going to be putting out a very detailed standardized operating procedures for our teams to follow for how they're collecting the samples and which way they're being stored and how they're being shipped and sent for analysis. So that XPRIZE will actually be doing all of those analysis with sort of centralized or regional vendors. So that we'll name who does them. It's not on the team. We'll have a centralized bank to do them. But again, how those samples are collected, we need to have a dialogue with our teams and make sure that everyone can do this.
Yeah, and
And
I guess
yeah,
I was very unfair. I asked you two very detailed questions at the
yes, you
same
did.
time. So maybe we need to kind of wind back to what's going to happen
The
in this
timelines.
in this next phase. I mean, I might need to say that really what you're doing in this whole process is starting to create the internationalized
We
standardization
are.
for aging biomarkers, right? Which is a huge debate as well. But maybe we won't go down that rabbit hole just today.
Oh, we could
But
have a whole session on that. So
yeah,
biomarkers and biomarkers for trials is one of my great obsessions. And
right.
so, but you're right, a little too much for today.
Yeah, great. So once you get into the steps for next year,
Yeah.
what does next year look like? And then perhaps you take us into, as you said earlier, 2025.
Great. So we are actually at a really exciting point in the prize. So our after a year of meeting and doing and refining and talking, our teams are coming in. We have more than 550 teams. We're doing that massive down select to 40. Those 40 teams that we announced as semifinalists, again, they're going forward in May. They have more teams can continue. I do also need to say that we're doing a down select of 40 to pick our top 40 teams to proceed. It doesn't mean those are the only teams allowed. If teams are not selected in the top 40 and that our judges don't flow a red flag, meaning, if the judges review it and they say for safety reasons or for other practicality reasons, really should not be doing this, then, that will be one stop. But for other teams that choose to continue, they might be the underdogs, but they can still stay in. But those
Okay.
top 40 teams have a unique benefit is that we offer them a milestone award, which is a cash prize that's unrestricted. It's 250,000 US that they could use to help fund their studies or to do anything else they need with. Again, it's an unrestricted prize. Those teams are going to be announced in May. And in May in New York City, on May 12th through 14th. We'll have an award ceremony that recognizes those teams that are proceeding and have been named as top 40 semifinalists. And then we'll also be coupling that with an investor summit. And so for anyone who's investing in longevity, it would be a great spot to be, is that we'll be doing a lot of matchmaking services so that those top 40 teams, if they are looking for funding and investors and connections, it's a place for them to be made. And for the investors that are in the space, is one of the great reasons, a great perk of running a prize is in the absence of a regulatory approval process, is that what we're doing is inadvertently through our judging process, providing diligence. So for investors, is that this is an alternate way that you can say that actually these are the teams that the field feels actually has something positive and strong that might bear fruit in its testing, and that they're ready for clinical trials. And
Yeah, no,
so,
fascinating. I mean, obviously, it's accelerating,
right.
capital into the space, which is needed too. So, just to clarify, those that aren't in the 40, they can continue, but
Okay.
they will be continuing unfunded.
That's exactly right. And so it
Right.
does place more risk on them to come up with the funds and do the work, but we're not disallowing them to continue, again, barring a judge's statement where they review and say, we've jokingly talked about the worst case scenario would be if you try to do human heterochronic parabiosis, where you would sew two humans together, a young and an old. I think that would be disallowed. but
Right. Gotcha. Yeah.
but there are other approaches that could mimic the physiologic responses that would, of course, be allowed.
Right. Fascinating.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
again, so the judges would give feedback to the team and say, we really don't think that this is a great strategy. Have you considered? And so those are things they can do. And at that point, yes, the risk is on the team to continue. They wouldn't get the $250,000 award, and they would not be part of that investor summit. So I think that's the real draw for these early applicants. Those right
Can
now,
I just ask you,
165 to get the submissions in.
So, Jimmy, just to ask you about if you're, I mean, I'm not fixated on being outside the top 40, right? I'm not involved myself,
Right.
but if I was outside the top 40 and I was able to demonstrate through my own self-funding that I met the critical points that the 40 funded ones are, and some of them may drop out, you could come back into the race potentially.
Absolutely. And so again, but we're not closing the door. Those teams that want to continue, whether they're named or not, or if we have somebody who's coming in late, maybe they didn't think they would get regulatory approval and suddenly they did. We're allowing them to come in after. They have to send us a letter of intent to compete. They have to let us know that they're planning to do this, and that for the next milestone point, they will have to meet, the rest of those guidelines. So anything that those semifinalists do, the teams that would come in not a semifinalist would still have to do that. So that means running a small proof of concept study, ensuring that they do have regulatory approval to test their therapeutic or their approach or protocol in any way. They have to show that they can not only have the approval, but actually do the work. So they have to recruit human subjects. And they have to pre-state ahead of time, right? Some have some a priori definition of what for them is a good or a bad signal that they would proceed to a larger trial. So for some teams, that might be if they're doing drug work for the first time, they might be looking at pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic responses in human subjects. Others that might be working on something that's a little more safe. Maybe they've already done the study and they would just need to submit the results in de-identified data set. Very simple.
Okay.
We have others that are looking at combinations. I've tested drug A and I've tested lifestyle intervention B, and we want to see how they work together, what their combination is. And so that's what they would be testing, is the feasibility of that approach. And because we have teams coming in from all different walks, we don't tell them what to do for semifinals. What we ask them to do is to run their study. They have to submit their data to us at the end, de-identified, so that we don't know who the subjects are. That's not important to us, but we do use it to just sort of do an audit if we need to, and to review the results that are received. And those teams are also putting in a finals application that details more thoroughly what they're going to do for those finals 1-year trials. And so that's what gets reviewed. And that could be our top 40 semifinalists. We do expect a number of our semifinalists, maybe they don't get regulatory approval in time and they can't run that study. So they might not continue. And so we leave the door open for other teams to submit and try for the finals as well.
Wow. I mean, obviously, Jamie, there's I'm very excited for May next year. That's going to be very, very interesting.
Would love to have you there, Phil.
Oh, well, I'll be there. It's my birthday as well. So, Always love New York on my birthday. So, let's sort of so wind back. You've got a couple of dates now that are the milestones. You guys are going to be super busy in the
Yes.
first part of next year. I mean, what this is going to do to accelerate our understanding of aging and health span, and obviously the investment capital coming into the space as well is super exciting. So, well, good luck to you and your team, Jamie, and thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure, Phil, and really happy that you're following along. Can't wait to share more once we unveil those next results.
Great. Look forward to it.
Thank you.